My dear brothers and sisters, there is something very interesting about toxic people. They appear confident, they appear powerful, sometimes they even appear dominant, but the truth is very different. Most toxic people are not strong. They survive by controlling the emotions of others. They manipulate, they guilt trip, they provoke reactions, they create drama, and they feed off the confusion they create in the hearts of people around them. But there is something that completely destroys their control: certain habits. When a person develops the right habits of character, clarity, and self-respect, toxic people suddenly become uncomfortable. Why? Because manipulation only works on those who are emotionally weak, confused, or desperate for approval. But when someone becomes emotionally stable and spiritually grounded, toxic people lose their ability to control them. And that is why today we will reflect on powerful habits that completely change the dynamic between you and toxic individuals. If you develop these habits, toxic people may not like you, but they will no longer control you. And sometimes the greatest protection Allah gives a believer is not removing toxic people from their life immediately, but giving them the strength and wisdom to deal with them properly. So let us reflect on some powerful reminders. One of the most powerful forms of control that toxic people use is emotional manipulation. They may not always realize they are doing it, but the pattern is very clear. Their words, their behavior, and their actions are often designed to trigger a reaction from you. They might say something insulting, they might question your intentions, they might criticize you unfairly, they might accuse you of things you did not do. And sometimes they say these things in a way that seems subtle, almost casual, but the purpose is the same. They are watching to see how you respond. Why? Because the moment you react emotionally, they gain control of the situation. If you become angry, they can label you as aggressive. If you become defensive, they can twist your words. If you become upset, they can continue provoking you until you lose your composure. Once emotions take over, clarity disappears. And when clarity disappears, manipulation becomes easier. This is why emotional control is one of the most powerful habits a person can develop. When someone says something hurtful and you immediately react with anger, you are playing the game they want you to play. But when someone tries to provoke you and you remain calm, something very interesting happens. The entire dynamic changes. They expected chaos. They expected an argument. They expected you to lose control. But instead, they are met with calmness. This confuses them. Toxic people rely heavily on emotional reactions. Without that reaction, they often do not know what to do next. Think about how many arguments in life begin with a single emotional response. Someone says something harsh. The other person reacts immediately. Voices become louder, words become sharper. Soon the situation becomes much bigger than it originally was. But imagine the same moment handled differently. Someone says something hurtful. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. You take a breath. You think for a moment before responding. Suddenly the situation slows down. You regain control of the conversation. This is not weakness. In fact, it is one of the greatest forms of strength. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us a lesson that is incredibly powerful in this regard. He said that the strong person is not the one who overpowers others in wrestling. The truly strong person is the one who controls himself when he is angry. Think about this carefully. Anyone can react in anger. Anyone can shout, anyone can insult, anyone can lose control of their emotions. But very few people have trained themselves to pause before reacting. Very few people have developed the discipline to control what they say when they feel provoked. And this is why emotional control is such a powerful habit. When you learn to control your reactions, toxic people begin to lose their influence over you. Imagine someone who constantly tries to provoke you. They say something sarcastic, you remain calm. They try to criticize you in front of others. You respond respectfully and calmly. They attempt to create conflict. You refuse to engage in unnecessary arguments. Eventually, they begin to realize something. Their usual tactics are not working. The buttons they normally press are no longer producing the reactions they expect. And when that happens, many toxic individuals begin to lose interest, because manipulation only works when someone is emotionally reactive. When a person becomes emotionally stable, manipulation becomes extremely difficult. Now, this does not mean that you become silent when injustice happens. It does not mean that you accept disrespect. It simply means that you respond with clarity rather than emotion. There is a big difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate and emotional. Responding is thoughtful and controlled. Reacting often leads to regret. Responding leads to wisdom. How many times have people said something in anger and later wished they could take those words back? How many relationships have been damaged because of a single emotional outburst? This is why learning to pause before speaking is such an important habit. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence for a moment. Silence allows the mind to settle. It allows emotions to calm down. It allows you to think clearly about what should be said. Even something as simple as taking a slow breath can completely change the direction of a conversation. When the heart is calm, the words become wiser. And when your words are calm and measured, toxic people cannot easily trap you in emotional chaos. Another important point to remember is that not every comment deserves a reaction. Some people say things simply to provoke you. If you react every single time, you are allowing them to control your peace. But if you learn to ignore unnecessary provocations, you protect your emotional energy. The wise person understands that their peace is valuable. Not every argument needs to be fought. Not every insult needs to be answered. Not every negative comment deserves your attention. Sometimes the most dignified response is calm silence. And sometimes the strongest response is simply walking away from unnecessary conflict. Emotional discipline takes practice. It does not happen overnight. There will be moments when you feel angry. There will be moments when your heart feels hurt. There will be moments when someone pushes your patience to the limit. But every time you choose calmness over reaction, you are strengthening your character. Every time you pause before speaking, you are training your mind. Every time you refuse to be dragged into emotional chaos, you are protecting your peace. And over time, something remarkable begins to happen. People begin to see you differently. They see someone who cannot be easily shaken. They see someone who does not lose control when situations become tense. They see someone who responds with wisdom rather than impulse. And toxic people quickly recognize that such a person is difficult to manipulate. Because when your emotions are under your control, your life is under your control. And when toxic people realize they can no longer control your emotions, their influence over your life begins to fade. My dear brothers and sisters, one of the biggest reasons toxic people are able to remain in someone's life for so long is not because they are powerful, but because the person around them has never learned how to set clear boundaries. Many people are kind. Many people are patient. Many people try to avoid conflict. And these are beautiful qualities. But when kindness is not balanced with self-respect, toxic individuals begin to take advantage of it. At first, the behavior may seem small. Someone speaks to you in a disrespectful tone. You ignore it. Someone repeatedly interrupts you. You remain silent. Someone criticizes you unfairly. You tell yourself to be patient. Someone crosses a line in how they treat you. You convince yourself it is not worth addressing. But slowly something begins to happen. The toxic person becomes comfortable. They begin to feel that this behavior is acceptable. And once someone becomes comfortable disrespecting your boundaries, they rarely stop on their own. They will continue pushing further. Not necessarily because they are always evil people, but because human beings often go as far as they are allowed to go. This is why boundaries are so important. A boundary simply means you clearly communicate what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not. It is not about shouting. It is not about humiliating someone. It is not about insulting them in return. It is simply about protecting your dignity with calm clarity. Many people fear setting boundaries because they believe it will create conflict. They worry that people will become upset. They worry about being disliked. But the reality is that people who become angry when you set healthy boundaries were often benefiting from the lack of those boundaries in the first place. And this is an important realization. When you start protecting your time, your energy, and your dignity, some people will naturally become uncomfortable. Why? Because they were used to having access to things that they should never have had access to. The believer understands something very important. Islam teaches kindness. Islam teaches patience. But Islam also teaches dignity. Allah has honored the believer. A believer is not meant to live in humiliation. A believer is not meant to constantly tolerate disrespect. A believer is not meant to sacrifice their emotional and spiritual well-being just to keep everyone around them happy. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was one of the kindest human beings to ever walk the earth. But his kindness did not mean people could treat him without respect. He had clear principles. He had clear limits. And people around him understood those limits. This is what boundaries look like. For example, if someone constantly insults you in conversations, a boundary might sound like this: I prefer that we speak to each other respectfully. If the conversation becomes disrespectful, I will leave. Notice the difference. You are not attacking them. You are simply stating what behavior you will not accept. Or if someone constantly demands your time in unhealthy ways, a boundary might sound like this: I cannot continue this conversation right now. I need some time to focus on my responsibilities. Again, you are not being rude. You are simply protecting your time and energy. Toxic people often dislike boundaries because boundaries remove their ability to control situations. Without boundaries, they can say whatever they want. They can demand whatever they want. They can behave however they want. But when boundaries appear, they suddenly face consequences. And that is what they fear. Now, it is important to understand that setting boundaries does not mean you become harsh or arrogant. It simply means you become clear. Clarity removes confusion. When people know where the limits are, healthy relationships become easier. Respect becomes mutual and communication becomes more honest. Without boundaries, relationships often become filled with resentment. People feel hurt but never express it. They feel overwhelmed but never speak up. They feel disrespected but remain silent. And eventually the frustration builds inside the heart. This silent frustration slowly damages relationships. But when boundaries are communicated early and calmly, many problems can be prevented before they grow larger. Another important thing to remember is that boundaries are not about controlling others. You cannot control someone else's behavior, but you can control your response to their behavior. For example, you cannot force someone to speak kindly, but you can choose to step away from conversations where disrespect continues. You cannot force someone to value your time, but you can choose not to give unlimited access to people who misuse it. You cannot force someone to treat you with fairness, but you can refuse to remain in situations where injustice is repeated. These are forms of self-respect. And self-respect is something toxic individuals find very difficult to manipulate. When someone knows their worth, they are not easily controlled by guilt, pressure, or emotional games. And once toxic people realize that their tactics are no longer working, many of them begin to distance themselves. Sometimes people think losing certain individuals from their life is a loss. But in reality, sometimes it is protection. Allah removes certain people from our lives not as punishment but as mercy. Because not every relationship is meant to stay forever. Some relationships exist to teach us lessons. Some relationships reveal our weaknesses. Some relationships force us to grow stronger. And once we learn those lessons, those people slowly fade from our lives. Setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are someone who has spent many years trying to keep everyone happy. But over time, you will notice something powerful. Your peace increases. Your confidence grows, your relationships become healthier, and toxic individuals slowly lose the space they once occupied in your life. Because once a person develops the habit of setting clear boundaries, manipulation becomes much harder. And the moment toxic people realize they can no longer cross your limits freely, their control begins to disappear. One of the deepest weaknesses that toxic people learn to exploit is the human need for validation. Almost every person wants to feel accepted. We want to feel appreciated. We want to feel valued by others. There is nothing wrong with wanting healthy appreciation. It is natural for human beings to enjoy kind words and encouragement. But when someone becomes dependent on the approval of people, that is when problems begin. Because the moment your emotional stability depends on what others think of you, you have unknowingly handed them power over your heart. Toxic individuals quickly recognize this weakness. They become very skilled at giving approval when it benefits them and withdrawing it when they want to control you. Sometimes they praise you. Sometimes they make you feel important. They might say kind things that make you feel valued. And just when you start feeling comfortable, they suddenly change. They criticize you. They question you. They withdraw their support. They make you feel like you have disappointed them. And suddenly you find yourself trying to regain their approval. You start explaining yourself more. You start trying harder to please them. You start adjusting your behavior to avoid upsetting them. Without realizing it, you are now chasing something they control, their approval. This is one of the most effective ways toxic people maintain influence over others. As long as someone is emotionally dependent on their validation, they can continue manipulating the relationship. But something powerful happens when a person breaks free from this need. When a person stops seeking constant approval from others, toxic individuals lose their leverage. Because now they cannot control your emotions with praise or criticism. Now their opinions no longer determine your sense of worth. This is where faith becomes incredibly important. The believer understands something that brings great emotional stability. Your true value does not come from people. Your true value comes from Allah. Allah sees your sincerity even when people misunderstand you. Allah knows your intentions even when people judge you unfairly. Allah sees the effort you make even when nobody else notices. And when a person truly understands this, their heart becomes much stronger. They stop chasing approval from every direction. They stop adjusting their character just to please others. They stop feeling devastated when someone criticizes them unfairly. Instead, they focus on something far greater. They focus on pleasing Allah. Because if Allah is pleased with you, the opinions of people become far less important. Think about how much emotional energy people spend worrying about what others think. They worry about how they are perceived. They worry about whether people approve of their decisions. They worry about whether others like them. And sometimes this fear becomes so strong that people begin living their lives according to the expectations of others rather than according to what is right. They remain in toxic friendships just to avoid loneliness. They tolerate disrespect just to avoid being disliked. They sacrifice their values just to gain approval. But when a person strengthens their connection with Allah, their perspective begins to change. They realize that people's opinions constantly change. Someone who praises you today may criticize you tomorrow. Someone who supports you today may abandon you tomorrow. Human approval is unstable. It shifts with emotions, circumstances, and personal interests. But the pleasure of Allah is something far more stable and meaningful. When your heart becomes anchored to that truth, you no longer feel desperate for validation from others. You begin making decisions based on principles rather than popularity. You speak the truth even when it is uncomfortable. You maintain your dignity even when others attempt to undermine it. You treat people with kindness, but you do not allow them to control your sense of worth. This kind of independence is something toxic people find very threatening because they rely heavily on emotional dependency. They need people to seek their approval. They need people to feel insecure without their praise. But when someone becomes emotionally independent, their tactics begin to fail. If they criticize you unfairly, it does not break you. If they withdraw their approval, it does not destabilize you. If they attempt to make you feel inferior, it does not shake your confidence. You listen calmly. You reflect if there is truth in the criticism. And if there is no truth, you simply move forward without carrying the weight of their opinion. This is emotional freedom, and emotional freedom is one of the most powerful protections against toxic influence. Another important thing to remember is that not every criticism is harmful. Sometimes sincere advice helps us grow. The wise person remains open to constructive feedback. But there is a difference between sincere advice and manipulative criticism. Sincere advice is given with kindness and good intentions. Manipulative criticism is designed to weaken your confidence and make you dependent on someone's approval. When you no longer crave validation, it becomes much easier to recognize the difference. You can accept helpful advice without becoming emotionally controlled by harmful criticism. And over time, something remarkable begins to happen. You become more stable. You become more confident. You become less affected by the emotional games of others. Toxic people begin to realize that their approval no longer controls your behavior. Their criticism no longer shakes your identity. Their manipulation no longer influences your decisions. And when that happens, they slowly begin losing interest because they can no longer control you through praise or rejection. My dear brothers and sisters, a believer should treat people with kindness and respect, but a believer should never build their identity on the opinions of others. Your worth is not defined by how many people approve of you. Your worth is defined by your sincerity, your character, and your relationship with Allah. And when a person truly understands this, their heart becomes far less vulnerable to manipulation. Because when you stop seeking validation from people, toxic people lose one of their strongest tools of control. My dear brothers and sisters, one of the greatest protections a person can develop in life is the habit of careful observation. Many people move through relationships without truly paying attention to the behavior of those around them. They focus on words, promises, appearances, and emotions, but they do not take the time to observe patterns. And this is where toxic individuals often succeed. They say the right things. They make convincing promises. They present themselves in ways that appear sincere, but their actions tell a very different story. The problem is that many people ignore these signs in the beginning. They give endless chances. They explain away harmful behavior. They tell themselves that things will improve with time. But wisdom requires something deeper than hope. Wisdom requires observation. A wise person does not judge others based only on a single moment. Instead, they pay attention to patterns that appear repeatedly over time. How does this person behave when things do not go their way? How do they treat people who cannot benefit them? How do they react when they are criticized? How do they behave when they feel jealous, threatened, or frustrated? These moments reveal far more about a person's character than polite conversations ever will. Toxic individuals often maintain a pleasant appearance when situations are comfortable. They can appear friendly, charming, and supportive, but when pressure appears, their true character begins to surface. This is why careful observation is so important. The Prophet, peace be upon him, gave us a powerful principle that helps guide this habit. He taught that a believer is not stung from the same hole twice. This statement contains deep wisdom. It means that a wise person learns from experience. If someone deceives you once, it may have been an honest mistake. But if the same pattern repeats again and again, the believer becomes more cautious. They do not continue trusting blindly. They begin observing more carefully. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. Islam does not encourage paranoia or constant distrust. Rather, it teaches balanced awareness. You remain kind. You remain respectful. But you also remain aware. You pay attention to behavior. You notice patterns. You reflect on how people treat others. Toxic individuals often reveal themselves through consistent patterns of behavior. For example, you may notice that they often create unnecessary conflict between people. They carry stories from one person to another. They enjoy spreading tension in conversations. At first, it may seem small, but when this behavior continues repeatedly, it reveals something about their character. Or you may notice that they rarely accept responsibility for their mistakes. Whenever something goes wrong, they quickly blame someone else. They twist situations so that they appear innocent while others appear guilty. Again, this may happen once or twice, but when it becomes a pattern, it tells you something important. Some toxic individuals also behave very differently depending on who they are speaking to. With people who have power or status, they become extremely polite and respectful. But with those they consider weaker, their tone becomes harsh and dismissive. These changes in behavior reveal a great deal about a person's true nature. A person of sincere character treats others with dignity regardless of their status. Observation allows you to recognize these differences. And when you begin recognizing patterns, you gain clarity. Clarity protects your heart. Many people remain trapped in toxic relationships because they ignore patterns for too long. They keep focusing on occasional good moments while overlooking repeated harmful behavior. But wise observation allows you to see the full picture. You begin to understand who someone truly is, not just who they appear to be in pleasant moments. Another important aspect of observation is paying attention to how people treat your boundaries. When you calmly express a limit, how do they respond? Do they respect it? Or do they mock it, ignore it, and try to push past it? Respect for boundaries is often a clear indicator of someone's character. A person who respects your limits shows that they value your dignity. A person who repeatedly ignores your limits shows that they value their own desires more than your well-being. Observation also helps you recognize emotional manipulation. Some people create guilt to control others. Some create confusion. Some constantly change their stories to suit their situation. But when you pay attention carefully, these patterns become easier to recognize. And once you recognize them, toxic individuals lose much of their influence over you, because manipulation works best when the target is unaware. Once awareness appears, the manipulation becomes obvious. And when something becomes obvious, it loses its power. But observation requires patience. It requires you to slow down and reflect rather than rushing to trust every impression. Sometimes people reveal their character not through what they say, but through how they behave over time. A wise person does not rush into deep trust. They allow time to reveal the truth. They observe how someone behaves in different situations. They observe how someone treats people when there is no benefit involved. They observe how someone handles responsibility, conflict, and honesty. Over time, these observations create a clearer understanding of who someone truly is. And when you develop this habit, toxic people find it very difficult to deceive you because they rely heavily on confusion and emotional reactions. But when you remain calm and observant, their patterns become visible. Their manipulation becomes easier to recognize. Their influence becomes weaker. My dear brothers and sisters, observation is not about judging people harshly. It is about protecting your heart and your peace. Allah has given human beings the ability to reflect and understand. When we use that ability wisely, we protect ourselves from unnecessary harm. So remain kind, remain respectful, but remain aware. Observe carefully. Reflect on patterns. Learn from experience. And remember the wisdom of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that a believer is not stung from the same hole twice. Because the moment you begin observing people carefully, toxic individuals realize something important. They can no longer deceive you as easily as before. One of the most valuable things Allah has placed inside the human heart is peace. Inner peace allows a person to think clearly, worship sincerely, make wise decisions, and face the challenges of life with patience. When the heart is calm, the mind becomes clearer. When the mind is clear, a person can navigate life with balance and dignity. But toxic individuals often disrupt this peace. They create unnecessary tension in conversations. They introduce conflict where none existed before. They bring drama into situations that could have remained calm and respectful. Sometimes they do this intentionally because they enjoy the sense of control that chaos gives them. At other times, they do it because they themselves are internally unsettled, and that internal turmoil spills over into their interactions with others. Many people make a critical mistake when dealing with such individuals. They believe that it is their responsibility to constantly fix the situation. They believe they must explain themselves again and again. They feel compelled to respond to every accusation, defend themselves against every misunderstanding, and resolve every argument that appears. Slowly, without realizing it, they begin sacrificing their emotional stability in an attempt to maintain peace with someone who does not truly value peace. This approach drains the heart. The more energy you invest in trying to repair situations that someone else keeps breaking, the more exhausted you become. Eventually, you may find yourself constantly thinking about that person's behavior, replaying conversations in your mind, worrying about what they will say next, or feeling anxious before even interacting with them. When someone occupies that much space in your thoughts, they are no longer just part of your life, they are controlling your peace. Protecting your peace means recognizing that not every situation requires your full emotional investment. There are moments when stepping back is wiser than stepping forward. There are conversations that do not need to continue. There are arguments that do not deserve your participation. There are individuals whose constant negativity should not be allowed to dominate your mental space. This does not mean becoming cold or dismissive toward others. Islam encourages kindness, patience, and forgiveness. However, kindness does not mean allowing yourself to be pulled into endless cycles of stress and emotional conflict. Forgiveness does not mean repeatedly placing yourself in situations that harm your well-being. Wisdom lies in understanding when engagement is beneficial and when distance is healthier. The Prophet, peace be upon him, demonstrated remarkable patience with people, but he also maintained dignity and clarity in his interactions. He did not allow unnecessary conflict to consume his energy. When certain individuals repeatedly created disruption without any intention of improving their behavior, he did not continuously chase their approval or remain entangled in their negativity. Instead, he focused his energy on those who valued guidance and sincerity. This is an important lesson for us. Your time, your emotional energy, and your attention are limited resources. Every moment you spend trapped in unnecessary arguments is a moment taken away from your growth, your family, your worship, and your peace of mind. When you allow toxic individuals to constantly draw you into conflict, they are essentially deciding how your energy will be spent. Protecting your peace requires conscious decisions about where your energy goes. It may mean choosing not to respond immediately when someone sends a provocative message. It may mean politely ending conversations that repeatedly turn disrespectful. It may mean reducing contact with individuals who consistently bring negativity into your life. These decisions are not acts of hostility, they are acts of self-preservation. Sometimes people fear that stepping back from toxic situations makes them weak. In reality, it requires significant strength. It is far easier to remain trapped in familiar conflict than it is to establish healthier patterns of interaction. It takes courage to say calmly and respectfully that you will no longer participate in certain behaviors or conversations. Another important aspect of protecting your peace is learning that you cannot control the character of other people. Many individuals exhaust themselves trying to change someone who has no intention of changing. They repeat the same advice, the same explanations, the same emotional appeals, hoping that eventually the other person will understand. But true change must come from within the individual themselves. No amount of effort from you can force someone to develop sincerity, empathy, or accountability if they do not wish to cultivate those qualities. Accepting this reality can be liberating. It allows you to shift your focus from trying to control others to strengthening your own emotional stability. Instead of constantly reacting to someone else's behavior, you begin building habits that protect your heart from being overwhelmed by it. One of these habits is learning the power of calm disengagement. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every comment requires clarification. Not every misunderstanding needs to be argued. Sometimes the most effective way to preserve your peace is to quietly step away from conversations that lead nowhere productive. When toxic individuals realize that their attempts to create conflict are no longer pulling you into emotional turmoil, their influence begins to weaken. Another habit is investing your energy in environments that nourish your heart rather than draining it. Spend time with people who bring sincerity, respect, and positivity into your life. Surround yourself with individuals who encourage your growth, remind you of Allah, and contribute to a healthier emotional atmosphere. These relationships strengthen you and make it easier to maintain peace even when you encounter difficult personalities. Protecting your peace also means remembering that your ultimate stability comes from your connection with Allah. When your heart is anchored in faith, the chaos created by others becomes less overwhelming. You begin to realize that not every insult diminishes your worth, and not every accusation requires your defense. Allah knows your intentions, Allah sees your patience, Allah understands your struggles even when others misinterpret them. When this awareness grows stronger, your emotional center becomes more stable. Toxic individuals may still attempt to provoke reactions, but their efforts begin to lose their impact. They discover that the turbulence they once created in your life no longer produces the same results. Over time, something remarkable happens. The noise around you becomes quieter. Situations that once consumed your thoughts begin to fade in importance. Your heart becomes lighter because it is no longer carrying the weight of unnecessary conflict. And toxic individuals begin to realize that they no longer have the ability to disturb your inner stability the way they once did. Protecting your peace is not selfish, it is responsible. A calm heart allows you to fulfill your responsibilities more effectively, treat others with greater patience, and maintain the clarity needed to live with dignity. When you guard your peace wisely, you strengthen your character and remove the control that toxic people once had over your emotional world. My dear brothers and sisters, one of the most powerful habits that weakens the influence of toxic people is the habit of consistency in your character. Consistency means that your principles do not change depending on the situation, the pressure, or the people around you. Your behavior remains guided by the same values, whether someone is praising you or criticizing you, whether someone is kind to you or trying to provoke you. Toxic individuals often rely on unpredictability. They test people repeatedly to see how far they can push them. One day they may say something disrespectful just to see if you will tolerate it. Another day they may behave kindly to regain your trust. Then they may suddenly return to their previous behavior to see if your response changes. They study your reactions. If they notice that your boundaries shift depending on your mood or depending on who is present, they learn how to exploit that inconsistency. For example, if you tolerate disrespect one day but react strongly the next day, they become curious about where the real limit is. They continue pushing, observing, and testing because they sense that the limits are unclear. But when a person develops consistent character, everything becomes much clearer. Your calmness is consistent. Your respect toward others is consistent. Your refusal to tolerate disrespect is consistent. Your principles do not fluctuate depending on pressure or emotional circumstances. This kind of stability creates a powerful message to those around you. People begin to understand that your values are not temporary moods. They are part of who you are. Toxic individuals quickly notice this difference. When they attempt to provoke someone who is inconsistent, they may succeed sometimes and fail other times. This unpredictability encourages them to keep trying. They believe that if they push long enough, they will eventually find a moment when the person weakens. But when they encounter someone whose character remains steady regardless of the situation, they begin to lose interest. Because no matter what they try, the response remains the same: calm, clear, respectful, firm. Consistency removes confusion. When people know exactly what behavior you accept and what behavior you do not accept, manipulation becomes far more difficult. This principle also applies to how you treat others. A person of strong character does not change their behavior based on who they are speaking to. They do not show respect to powerful people while belittling those they consider weaker. They do not speak kindly in public but behave harshly in private. Their character remains the same regardless of the audience. This kind of integrity builds credibility. Even people who disagree with you will begin to recognize that your character is not shaped by convenience or pressure. They may not always like your boundaries or your decisions, but they understand that your behavior follows a consistent set of principles. Toxic individuals often struggle with this type of person because they rely heavily on emotional shifts and inconsistencies in others. If they attempt to guilt you, your response remains calm. If they attempt to provoke anger, your composure remains steady. If they attempt to flatter you in order to gain control, your behavior does not suddenly change. Over time, they begin to realize that their usual tactics are ineffective. The Prophet, peace be upon him, demonstrated this type of consistent character throughout his life. His patience did not depend on who he was dealing with. His honesty did not change depending on the situation. His compassion remained steady even when people around him behaved harshly. Because his character was consistent, people eventually recognized his sincerity. Even those who opposed him could not deny his integrity. This is the power of consistency. When your actions repeatedly reflect the same values, people begin to trust your character. They understand that your decisions are guided by principles rather than emotions. Consistency also protects you from being emotionally manipulated. When your behavior is guided by clear principles, you are less likely to make decisions in moments of anger, pressure, or confusion. For example, if respect is one of your core values, you will treat others respectfully, even when they behave poorly. But at the same time, you will consistently maintain boundaries that protect your dignity. If honesty is one of your values, you will not distort the truth simply to avoid criticism or gain temporary approval. If patience is one of your values, you will not allow momentary anger to destroy your relationships or your peace. These consistent habits strengthen your character over time. They create emotional stability. They create clarity in your relationships. And they make it far more difficult for toxic people to manipulate your reactions. Another important benefit of consistency is that it simplifies your decisions. When your values are clear, you do not have to constantly wonder how to respond in difficult situations. Your principles guide your actions automatically. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond according to the character you have trained yourself to maintain. This makes your life more peaceful and less chaotic. And toxic individuals quickly notice that they are no longer able to push you into unpredictable emotional reactions. My dear brothers and sisters, consistency does not mean perfection. Every human being has moments of weakness. There may be times when emotions overwhelm us or when we wish we had handled a situation differently. But the goal is progress. The more you practice consistency in your values, the stronger your character becomes. The more stable your character becomes, the less influence toxic individuals will have over your life. Because manipulation thrives in instability. It thrives when people are unsure of themselves. It thrives when boundaries shift constantly. But when a person develops a stable and consistent character, that instability disappears. And when instability disappears, toxic people lose the ability to control the situation the way they once could. Over time, they realize something important. They are no longer dealing with someone who can be easily shaken. They are dealing with someone whose character stands firm, and that is something toxic individuals find very difficult to manipulate. The final habit that truly removes the power of toxic people from your life is learning to place your trust in Allah above every human being. Many people remain trapped in unhealthy relationships not because they do not see the problem, but because they are afraid. They fear losing someone's approval. They fear losing opportunities. They fear being misunderstood. They fear that if they step away from a toxic situation, something important in their life will disappear. These fears can become very powerful. They can convince a person to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, and emotional harm for far longer than they should. But when a believer develops deep trust in Allah, something remarkable happens inside the heart. The source of security begins to change. Instead of depending on people for stability, the heart begins depending on Allah. Instead of fearing that someone else controls your future, you begin to understand that your life is in the hands of your Creator. And this realization changes everything. Toxic individuals often try to create the illusion that they hold power over you. They may act as if they control opportunities in your life. They may behave as if your success depends on their approval. They may attempt to make you feel that losing them would be a disaster. But the believer remembers a simple and powerful truth. No human being controls your destiny. Only Allah does. If Allah has written something for you, no person can take it away. No manipulation, no gossip, no injustice can block what Allah has already decreed for your life. And if Allah has not written something for you, then no amount of chasing people or pleasing them will force it to happen. When a person truly understands this, their heart becomes much calmer. They no longer feel desperate to maintain every relationship at any cost. They no longer feel pressured to tolerate harmful behavior simply to protect opportunities or approval. Instead, they focus on something far more important. They focus on living with sincerity, dignity, and faith. This type of trust is called tawakkul. Tawakkul means relying on Allah while continuing to make responsible efforts in life. It does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean ignoring problems or avoiding responsibility. It simply means that while you take action in your life, your heart remains connected to Allah rather than being controlled by fear of people. When tawakkul becomes strong in a person's heart, toxic individuals lose one of their most powerful tools: fear. Many toxic relationships survive because one person is afraid of losing the other. They fear loneliness. They fear losing social status. They fear losing opportunities that they believe only that person can provide. But the believer remembers that Allah is Ar-Razzaq, the provider. The opportunities in your life do not come from people alone. They come from the one who controls every door. If one door closes, Allah can open another door in ways you could never have imagined. If one person walks away, Allah can replace them with someone far better for your life. When this belief becomes deeply rooted in the heart, a person becomes emotionally stronger. They stop tolerating behavior that damages their dignity. They stop chasing individuals who repeatedly harm them. They stop sacrificing their peace just to keep certain people happy. Instead, they trust that Allah will guide them toward what is better. The Quran reminds us that whoever places their trust in Allah, He is sufficient for them. This statement carries immense comfort. It reminds us that we are never alone in the challenges we face. Even when people misunderstand us, Allah understands. Even when people accuse us unfairly, Allah knows the truth. Even when people attempt to harm our reputation, Allah sees our intentions. And when the heart truly believes this, the need to constantly defend oneself before people becomes much smaller. You begin focusing on your relationship with Allah rather than constantly worrying about the opinions of others. Toxic individuals often try to manipulate emotions by creating guilt or fear. They may say things designed to make you doubt yourself. They may try to convince you that you cannot succeed without them. They may attempt to make you feel responsible for their unhappiness. But when your trust is anchored in Allah, these emotional pressures lose their strength. You realize that your responsibility is to act with sincerity, fairness and dignity. Beyond that, the outcomes of your life are in Allah's hands. This perspective brings tremendous peace to the heart. It allows you to make decisions based on faith and wisdom rather than anxiety. It allows you to walk away from harmful situations without feeling that your entire future is collapsing. It allows you to face challenges with patience, knowing that Allah's plan is always greater than our understanding. Another beautiful result of trusting Allah is that it softens the heart. Instead of becoming bitter toward toxic individuals, you begin to see their behavior with a different perspective. Some people harm others because they themselves are struggling internally. Some people manipulate because they feel insecure. Some people create chaos because they have never learned how to build peace within their own hearts. This does not excuse their behavior, but it allows you to respond with wisdom rather than hatred. You maintain your boundaries. You protect your dignity, but you do not allow bitterness to poison your heart. You leave the matter in the hands of Allah, knowing that He is the most just and the most aware of what every soul has done. My dear brothers and sisters, trusting Allah above all people is not just a spiritual habit, it is a powerful source of emotional strength. It frees the heart from unhealthy dependency on others. It frees the mind from constant fear of losing approval. It frees the soul from feeling trapped in relationships that damage your peace. When your heart trusts Allah deeply, you walk through life with a different kind of confidence. You treat people with kindness. You interact with sincerity. But you no longer feel controlled by their opinions, their manipulation, or their approval. And when toxic people realize that your security comes from Allah rather than from them, they understand something very important. They can no longer control you the way they once did. My dear brothers and sisters, when we reflect on these habits, we begin to understand something very important about human relationships. Toxic people do not actually fear loud voices. They do not fear arguments. They do not fear anger. In fact, arguments and emotional reactions often give them exactly what they want. What truly unsettles toxic people is something very different. They become uncomfortable around people who are calm, people who are emotionally disciplined, people who know their value, people who are not desperate for approval, people who protect their peace, and most importantly, people whose hearts are firmly connected to Allah. Because a person like this cannot be easily manipulated. A person like this cannot be controlled through guilt, fear, or emotional pressure. When someone knows their worth, when their character is stable, and when their trust is placed in Allah rather than in people, the entire dynamic of toxic relationships begins to change. You stop reacting to every provocation. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop sacrificing your dignity just to keep someone satisfied. Instead, you begin living with clarity. You begin protecting your peace. You begin choosing relationships that bring sincerity rather than constant emotional struggle. And something interesting happens when you reach this stage. Toxic people begin to lose interest because the emotional reactions they once relied on are no longer there. The confusion they once created no longer controls you. The approval they once used as leverage no longer determines your worth. And slowly their influence fades. My dear brothers and sisters, life will always bring different types of people into our path. Some will bring goodness and sincerity. Others may bring lessons that strengthen our wisdom. But no matter who we encounter, the most important thing is to protect the character of our own hearts. Remain calm, remain dignified, remain observant, protect your peace. And above all, keep your trust in Allah, because when your heart is anchored in faith and guided by strong character, no toxic person will ever have the power to control your life again. May Allah grant us wisdom in our relationships, strength in our character, and peace in our hearts.